Welcome to the room. This is Marlin Johnson, and I am with Dr. Marion Bell and Dr. Jeff Bowden. Dr. Bowden is coordinator of the Political Science Department, and Dr. Bell is assistant professor, Department of Political Science and Public Affairs. And we're going to discuss voting in Georgia today. And the first question I want to lay out is, what is the difference between liberalism and nationalism? And I want to frame it this way, is I've heard that liberalism is a citizen primarily is an individual who makes a social contract with a group, whereas nationalism is a citizen is primarily a member of a group or a tribe, and he seeks to be an individual within that. And I want to throw that first to you, Dr. Bowden. What do you think about that assessment, and what is liberalism and nationalism in your view?
I think liberalism takes a number of different views. I don't think the social contract view is one of the sort of most accurate views of the history of liberalism. It doesn't really seem accurate to me at all. It seems a better way to sort of focus on liberalism is to think about the relationship one has in developing autonomy within one's life, right? And so nationalism, in contrast to that, if that's the distinction that you're going for to help you understand the framework of thinking about these things, I would suggest that nationalism then becomes sort of binding your identity towards the exercise of power associated with one particular group that oppresses other groups, right?
Right.
And that's the way I would contrast nationalism with liberalism. With liberalism being everyone sort of has the ability, the autonomy to sort of shape their own life, regardless of what the larger identity of society would be. So you protect individual rights within that context. The social contract framing of it is not particularly helpful and really not particularly accurate. I mean, we never make a social contract. When you're born and I'm born and Dr. Bell is born, we never grow up and get to a point where we say, well, we agree we're going to contract with everybody in the society. It just doesn't happen that way, right?
Right.
So as sort of a moral framework, perhaps it can be helpful, but not the greatest way of thinking about it, I would think. So I think the best way to think about it is autonomy in making choices that shape your own life versus a view of society in which your identity is bound up with the exercise of power of one group over other groups within that society. So if we have an instance of nationalism in American society right now, it is the exercise of power of one group over other groups, and it is that exercise of power that becomes the identity of that group.
So this morning, there was a leak from Politico that the Supreme Court is probably going to overturn Roe versus Wade. So Dr. Bell, thinking about what Dr. Bowden just said about exercising power and from the difference between liberalism and nationalism, do you think it can happen? And if it does happen, would it happen because of nationalist kind of thinking?
Are you asking, do you think it's going to be overturned?
No. I guess what I'm asking is so the court seems to have been stacked a bit, right? I mean, all presidents stack courts if they can, yes? And so here lately it's been kind of stacked with, and it seems like the major issue with all these appointments for the last few times has been abortion. Mm-hmm. It seems that way to me. And so that now that this leak is coming up, or this leak came out, I guess what I'm asking is, if it does happen, would it happen because of a nationalist type of view of how to run the country?
Well, I think this opinion it goes against what most Americans want.
That's true.
You know, which opinion polls and surveys pretty clearly show that most Americans believe that a woman should have a right to choose, and the data backs that up. But what I think this shows is that, out of the 9 Supreme Court justices, a majority are in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade. And Alito's opinion, discussed it not deeply rooted in the nation's histories and traditions. And to go ahead and take the next step, I think that puts a number of decisions in jeopardy. Brown v. Board is not rooted deeply in our nation's history, right? So is that next? What is the next step? This is a huge deal. The biggest part of this is not that it was leaked, but if this decision is going to be handed down, like in Texas, for example, as soon as this goes through, Texas, if a woman is raped by her uncle and goes to a doctor to have a procedure, that doctor is going to be charged with a felony. So I think this is a very big deal. Whether it speaks to something deeper within nationalism and liberalism, I think that's hard to say. I think this is about the people who are on the court, and if we want to discuss how they got there and how that happened, that's a different discussion. But to me, it's just it represents a majority of the 9 people who have been appointed to the nation's highest court.
So in Texas, if I'm not mistaken, it's Texas that has the bounty law, right? That if somebody helps somebody have an abortion, that they can be civilly sued. Is that correct? Am I correct about that? Mm-hmm. And so if this were to happen and somebody were in Texas and wanted to go to, let's say, Massachusetts for an abortion, couldn't they be chased down under this Texas law?
Are you asking if somebody could?
I'm asking about the parameters of the Texas law, if you're aware of them. I'm not sure.
Right. I mean, part of the issue with the Texas law is that it authorizes payments, right, to private citizens to perform particular tasks of informing government, right? I mean, that's part of what's going on in the Texas law, right?
Right.
You can also sue in the court. I mean, it's unclear right then whether or not the person has standing, and that's one of the reasons why the Supreme Court didn't overturn it, and they obviously, I don't think, wanted to overturn it.
They didn't even look at it. Is that correct?
Well, they didn't look at it on its merits. But they even on the procedural issue, they didn't make much of a ruling. They just let it stand because it's unclear whether or not a private citizen in the state of Texas has standing to sue someone else who is in the process of getting abortion or who is getting abortion, right? So why is it any of, let's say, one person's business to sue another person for something that I'm doing that has nothing to do with him? Why is it that he has standing to sue? In order to sue in a court, you have to have some sort of legal reason to be there, right? And what the Supreme Court sort of backed away from and they didn't know how to deal with, or at least refused to deal with, is to say whether or not this person has standing to sue someone else about something that's really none of their business. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense. So
Okay.
all polling tells us that what Dr. Bell said earlier is absolutely right, that 70% of Americans are not interested in penalizing people for deciding to get an abortion. So how is it that these laws are getting passed when the majority of Americans, Dr. Bell?
Yeah, well, I mean, Congress, whether it be, the different branches of government, if you look at from the president to the courts, are really in Congress. We'll stick with Congress. They don't necessarily, they're not led by public opinion polls. They don't have to necessarily listen to voters for a variety of reasons. Staggered elections, whether, a senator's not going to, they've got a little longer to worry about re-election, but really, when it comes down to it, each senator in Georgia is only worried about what Georgians think, right? There's when we look at these national polls and what people want, what people in Alabama want is much different than say Maine or New Hampshire, Vermont, or California. So when you have, looking at the House of Representatives, is an even better example that all a House member cares about is what their district wants. So I'm sure we're going to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene at some point. There's a huge backlash, right, around the country toward her. There's only a very select group of people that vote for her. So if her district is still 60% very conservative, she's going to get elected again. There's things that are happening that people, she may be prevented from running again. But we have to remember that if someone causes an uproar in Alabama, and people can donate and go down there to get the vote out in Alabama, but it's still those voters. And if they are supportive of that candidate, or and they're seeking re-election, it's going to happen. So remember that senators in each state are only bound to people in their state, and then House members, even their districts. It's many times an even smaller group of people. That it doesn't matter if for instance, left-wing Twitter is up in arms about someone in Georgia. It's only those voters there that get out and vote.
So here in Georgia, let's bring the voting down to our home state here, because it was pivotal in the presidential election. We turned Georgia blue. I say we. I knocked on doors. I don't mind telling everybody that I'm a progressive liberal. So we turned Georgia blue in the Senate, and that was kind of a surprise for a lot of people, because Georgia is classically considered a very conservative state. So nationwide, it looks like that 2/3 of eligible voters cast the ballot for president in 2020, which was pretty good turnout, because at the Civil War, at the beginning of the Civil War in 1860, 81.2% of eligible voters. And who are the eligible voters at that time, Dr. Bell?
White men. Women, were not voting. Black people were not voting in 1860. So it was 81%, about 4 or 5 of a much different population compared to today.
Okay.
So when you see a number like that, it's just two completely different populations. So that's really difficult to compare.
Right. Well, in 1996, and I believe this was the Bill Clinton's election, Dr. Bowden, only 49% of people voted. Do you know why? Okay, is there an explanation for that?
Well, this gets back to, I think, your previous question about why majorities support things, but our country seems to not enact those things. It's because our government is designed to be minoritarian rule, essentially, right?
And what does that mean exactly?
That means at every turn, even in its design at the Constitutional Convention, is allowed to give, it's designed to give minorities the power to rule. Through the construction of the Senate, through the gerrymandering of House districts, through the Electoral College in the executive branch, through the absolute total unaccountability of Supreme Court justices.
This is like the squeaky wheel thing, like if a minority shouts the loudest, then they have the power.
No, it's just that all they have to do is get a certain amount of power, and if you get the power, that certain amount of power, and exercise it in the right way, then you can have an enormous amount of rule and power. So, yeah, our system, the Senate is the worst part of it, right? Very small states, Rhode Island, Montana, Wyoming, that have almost no people in them, Alaska, right, get 2 senators. And the biggest states in the Union, California, Texas, also get 2 senators. That's not democracy. That's not people's vote counting equally. And that's why you get situations like 49% of the people voting, because ultimately they know that more often than not in American history, your vote does not count. It doesn't do anything.
You said once in class, and I was very impressed by this, Dr. Bowden, you said that 70 million people voted for Donald Trump and they got nothing for it.
Yeah, 72 million people voted for Donald Trump at the second highest vote total maybe for any candidate in the history of the world, probably, right? Second only to Joe Biden in the same election, right? And that many people vote for the same candidate and get absolutely nothing. So our system is designed to be winner takes all, but again, within the institutions themselves, right, you have an enormous amount of influence by the minority, right? The latest stat that I saw on the current makeup of our Senate is that 41% of the country voted for the current 50 senators the Republican senators in the Senate. 59% voted for the Democratic 50 senators, right? So 59 to 41 ultimately ends up being 50-50 in the Senate, right?
Right.
You'll have similar numbers, maybe even worse numbers, right, in the House of Representatives. But I mean, the absurdity of the decision, right? The leak, whatever it's going to look like, who knows what it's going to look like at the end of the day. The absurdity is you've got 9 people who are completely and totally unaccountable, making decisions about our rights. So, and they're doing it very, very aggressively right now. And a lot of them, let's put it, here's another instance of minority view. They were appointed by 5 of them, right? 5 of the 6 in the conservative wing right now were appointed by presidents who did not receive a majority of the votes in the country when they were elected.
So
George W. Bush and Donald Trump, neither one received a majority of the votes, and yet appointed 5 of these justices. Our system is messed up. So if you want to know why only 49% of the people vote, it's because you can influence society in other ways, right? You can have more influence in our system besides vote. I'm not telling people not to vote. I think you should vote, but the reality is that that's not going to get you very much given the structure of our system.
So I did a little research for this meeting, and I found out that we broke down voting by age. And I've always had the impression that the older generation votes better than the younger generation, but apparently that's not true. That for people who are over 65, only 19.7% of them are voting, whereas people in the age bracket between 45 and 65, as much as 33.5%.
I think you're misreading that chart.
Is this, or this is the total votes? And so,
yes, those are total votes, and they're breaking it down by age bracket.
But if I'm not mistaken, because of the baby boom, the majority aren't the majority of Americans 65 or older?
I doubt it. I seriously doubt it.
Okay.
Yeah. I think most of those people are dying off.
So
they vote in much higher numbers. Your impulse, what you thought was right, is right, I think, which is that group of people 65 and over vote at a much higher rate. But that's not what that chart's saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it looks like the largest group of people who are voting are between the age of 45 and 65. Is that right?
That sounds
apparently
probably right. Yeah.
Okay. And what would be, Dr. Bell, what would be the reason for that, do you think, that age group more so than younger or older? Is it population, or is it?
There's a variety of reasons. And when we talk about voting, what Dr. Bowden says, your vote counting and why people don't vote. when we're talking about voting rights, you're doing one of two things. You're making it easier to vote, or you're making it more difficult. And there's just a long list of things that we vote. You know, when is voting day? It's the first Tuesday after the first Monday, right in November. A number of countries vote on weekends. They, you know, we have early voting now, but there's a general, you know, people are unsure of many of the rules for a variety of reasons. And there's been a push to increase voter rights and making it easier to vote, but there's a ton of pushback, and the majority of legislation that's getting passed is making it harder to vote.
Well, who benefits from that, Dr. Bell? If it's harder to vote, why would somebody who wants to be elected make it harder for people to vote?
There's more people that lean, you know, liberal-leaning people. There's more Democrats in the United States, so you can kind of take with that what you will, and what party would benefit from making it more difficult.
So when there's big voter turnout, who normally wins?
Democrats. Yeah, and in undergrad, I had a professor from Duke University, Dr. Gomez. He wrote a book saying that Republicans should pray for rain every election. And you know, again, in class, you would always say, who doesn't know how they're going to vote, right? Everyone's either a Republican or a Democrat, and
right.
99%. And you know, that book, what Dr. Gomez wrote about, it's not going to turn away 10% or 20%. It's going to turn away 1%, maybe 2% of people. And those small margins, when you look to Wisconsin, you look to Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania, and we have those small margins of victory, that can, you know, as we talked about in class, that can determine the fate of the nation, right? Just 1 or 2% of people, you know, staying home or not making it to the polls in a place like Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. That can be the difference between a Republican and a Democrat being elected, and then you have the trickle down effect that we've seen in the courts, where someone won without receiving the most votes, and what are they able to do? They're able to appoint justices. So it's not, you know, we see these numbers, and, you know, Dr. Bowden earlier talked about, you know, the 41% has 50% of the senators, and 59% has only 50% of the senators. People, oh, that's not that big. Yes, it is. That's big. A huge millions and millions of votes. So, you know, back to, you know, to bring it back to, if it rains, or, you know, if you change just little things to keep people away from voting, it has just a... And
they're trying to do that, aren't they?
Well, they're not trying, they are.
They're doing it.
It's happening.
So, Dr. Bowden, look in your crystal ball and tell me, could the democracy end with the next midterm election? Well, you made the argument that we don't have one now.
Yeah, I mean, that question is anachronistic for me.
Well, democracy that we see now.
I don't think we have much of a democracy now.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about 49%, I think Dr. Bell's right. I mean, the suppression of the vote, right, even if it's by weather or whatever, right, you're still looking at just very small margins there, which still doesn't explain ultimately, right, the 49. I mean, why do only half the people in our country vote, right? And I think that's an interesting question. It's more of a sociological question, right? I mean, why is it that most people in our country don't feel like it's important enough for them to go out and participate in our system of government? And it's because they don't think that we have a democratic form of government.
So I was raised by liberal Democrats, black, in New York, right? Mm-hmm. So I come down here in Georgia during the presidential election of 2020, and then during the runoff, I was knocking on doors in primarily black neighborhoods, asking people to leave the house and go vote. And the people who told me they weren't going to do it pretty much told me they didn't think it mattered. They thought the system was rigged, that it was just a sham. Now, I've heard a lot of different reasons, but that was the underlying primary reason. Dr. Bell, why would black people who in this country, from my point of view, have the most to gain by voting, where during civil rights people were murdered because they wanted to vote. Why would people take that view?
Well, I think they told you why. You know, what was their response again?
They didn't think it mattered. They thought the system was rigged.
The system was rigged, and has it been rigged against older black folks in Georgia?
But the remedy is to vote. No, Dr. Bowden?
And again, you're right. But what are we talking, you know, logically, right?
Right.
How do we vote, though?
We vote emotionally.
What makes us vote?
We vote
If something happens that's emotionally compelling to
Right.
get them involved, they know someone or something happens or someone convinces them, but before that, we're not logical. You know, we're not rational. So if they believed, and again, what's the biggest influence on voting? How you vote and how often you vote is your family, right? So if they're raised in, you know, in a situation, in an environment where, hey, it's rigged, it's not worth my time. Again, and one side of the mouth, I'm saying, you know, we're not rational. But if it really has never helped you, and you've not seen anything change, then you can tell someone, hey, you need to get involved. It matters. But their whole life, it hasn't mattered. That maybe they voted for 4 election cycles, and what's happened for them? You know, voting rights. You know, just all kinds of things. You know, with black people in Georgia. Their evidence, their mind is saying, no, it hasn't changed. And you know what? I'm not going to take off work on a Tuesday and go vote. I'm not going to stand in line for 3 hours. Instead of 3 hours, I'm going to, you know, take my kid to a soccer game. I'm going to go and work 3 hours of overtime. So you can say, it's easy for people in different situations to say, you know, and it's right, like Dr. Bowden said. I hope everyone votes. We need to vote. I do value voting, right? I think it's important for people to vote, but there's so many good reasons that people have not to vote that you know, again, the time that it takes, there's many barriers to voting, and there's been a ton of evidence where it's, you know, people have seen that it hasn't changed things right now. You know, the last thing I'll say on this is right now with the leak of the Supreme Court opinion. Right. You have many Democratic voters that, you know, that are looking at their leaders like, what happened? We got out, we voted, we have the House, you know, the Senate, you know, with the VP tiebreaker. What have you done? So there's, you know, you can blame Republicans from Maine, and you can blame a Democrat from West Virginia. But there's many Democrats right now, and there's many independents who voted with Democrats that are saying, you know what, we did what you asked us, and now what has happened? You know, we haven't gotten anything.
Dr. Bowden, I say that they didn't come out and vote. They didn't like Hillary, they didn't like Trump, so they didn't come out and vote for either one. And this is why this is happening now, is that, in my opinion, yeah, they've done something. We elected Joe Biden, but we didn't. What was the turnout for the Trump Hillary Clinton presidential runoff? I mean, it was low.
It's a half. I mean, it's essentially about half. It's just, yeah. It's
so my argument is that if Democrats and progressive liberals like myself cared about what's happening right now, they should have cared back then, and I don't think they did.
Yeah. Well, part of the issue, right, is, I think what Dr. Bell is saying is very important, that we're just not producing the results, right? I mean, Joe Biden made a very, very specific campaign promise about canceling student debt, and he's wavering. Even as recently as last week, he still hasn't made up his mind about whether or not he's going to do the thing that he promised he would do.
Is that him or Joe Manchin?
That's him. He can do that. I mean, Joe Biden can do it with a stroke of the pen.
Why wouldn't he?
Why wouldn't he? I mean, this is the question. So all he's doing is telling students all across America, your vote for me essentially didn't get you what you thought it would get, right? We don't have the responsive government that you would expect in a democratic society. And that's because we don't really have a democratic form of government. And driving up the vote really doesn't matter. I mean, the reality is that say the older black families that you convinced to go out to vote, their vote probably did count towards a majority for Warnock, Ossoff, and Biden.
Yes.
That's probably true. The ones who stayed at home, their vote really wouldn't have made a difference, though, right?
That's true.
So that's because we have this system that's winner takes all.
If we have just enough, that's good enough.
Right. So if you want more people to participate, you've got to design a system where every vote really does count equally with every other vote, and every vote matters
Like
at the
Germany?
end of the day. It's some sort of proportional representation system, right? Where the margins really do matter, right? In our system, the margins don't matter.
Well, Dr. Bell, is that likely to change? Are we likely as Americans to change our voting so that we have more representative government?
In 2014, when I got to Savannah State, I was talking about the national popular vote, the kind of the drive for that, and what we see with federalism, each state they decide how they're going to do their elections. And just to kind of get back to something you said about 2016 and why was the turnout low, again, we are candidate-based elections. Each,
Right.
by and large, people were not excited by
Hillary Clinton.
By Hillary Clinton. And again, it's easy to look back and 4 years ago, kind of these things. Again, looking at social media, you see all over Twitter, well, I hope everyone's happy who didn't vote for Hillary or who voted for another Democrat that year and a right, whatever the case may be. But again, that's not how we think. We're moment to moment. Who right there is emotionally compelling to get me out, to make it worth it, to go stand in line, to go take time out of my day.
Right.
And again, is it really worth it?
So let me throw myself into this, okay? I personally liked Hillary Clinton a lot at one time, right? I read a lot about her. I thought she was a wonderful person. She did wonderful things. I think being the first lady to Bill messed her up, right? With all the things that went on with Travelgate and the rest of all the accusations and people following her around all the time. And so for me, Hillary Clinton was not the best candidate the Democrats could have put up. And it came to who do we like or who do we dislike the most? I won't vote for that guy. And that's what that election turned into. And it seemed like, to me, that the Democrats put Hillary Clinton up for election because they thought it was her turn. But that's not how this works, is it?
Well, I mean, Hillary Clinton won 3 million more votes than Donald Trump in 2016, right?
Right.
Okay. So, again, structural issues that make this minoritarian rule. But, I mean, I think there was some other things going on in 2016. Donald Trump finally figured out how to tap into sort of this deep-seated internet grievance rage that sort of existed out there, and harnessed it for his own advantage. And I think even he was surprised about that. I don't think Donald Trump ever expected to win that election. So I don't know. I mean, could Hillary have been more popular? Maybe, but she was. I mean, I think she was generally pretty popular among the Democrats. Her policies are probably more moderate for some. I'm not sure what that would have looked like in office for her. I think she probably would have been a good president, probably better than most that we've had. But I think the fundamental reality of that election in 2016 was a backlash against Obama. So, and I think it manifested pretty hard, and Trump knew how to harness that.
So Trump tapped into the crazy vein, let's say, in America. But has the crazy bar been raised? I mean, there was a time when Republicans were like Mitt Romney, and he was like, you know, like seen as ultra conservative and maybe a little bit out of it. But now we've got Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, what's crazy anymore? I mean, it used to be a time when somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene wouldn't even be considered. But what's going on with that?
Well, again, with her, she's not running for, she's not going to win president. She's probably would never have a chance as a senator. But what is she?
She's a congressperson in a very small district.
And where's that district, and what does that district look like in Georgia? So I think that answers your question.
Isn't that the district where black people couldn't be there after sundown at one time?
I'm not sure if it was right downtown, but again, the only people that matter for her reelection is that small district. So, you know, whether there's a national backlash, and to really, if other Republicans think she's good for the party or not, that's really not going to determine if she gets elected or not. Now, the larger discussion is the crazy bar been raised. Again, you know, we had Goldwater in the 60s, but now there's, like Dr. Bowden talked about, what Trump was good at is his emotionally charged campaigning through social media to connect with people that he has zero in common, you know, or very little in common.
Right,
with.
right.
But he was able to get people.
Grievance politics.
Yeah, grievance politics, but just excited that they felt like, you know, we talk about, you know, you knocked on doors to get people to vote. He brought in a large number of people who probably weren't big time voters, but they felt a part of something, you know, that he, definitely an emotionally charged campaign that was very simple, because what were his, you know, the depth of his issues and plans and policies, he kept it very simple. Came up with a few slogans, you know, build the wall, you know, make America great, you know, things that we remember that made it really easy to kind of draw that line in the sand, and it made it simple for people. Hey, you know what? I need to get behind this guy. This is really easy. And I think he had, you know, again, I ask my students all the time, in 2016, what was Hillary Clinton's message? What was on her hat, right? What was on her, you know, but you heard, you know, his was, you know,
Make America great.
Make America great again, build the wall, lock her up, all these things that we remember. And again, I've studied Hillary Clinton a lot, and what was really her number one thing?
I don't even remember.
You know, so.
And I'd like to think I would, because I pay attention to this stuff.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's complicated to. I mean, I would say that there's something that's definitely changed, right, in our politics over the last 10 years. The sorting is almost fully and completely complete, right? That exists in our politics. Dr. Bell and I may disagree maybe on this, but I'm not sure that we do. I mean, I do think someone, say, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, is accountable to her constituents and her constituents alone. Where I think things have changed over the last 10 years is that her constituents are now not focusing on her. Her constituents are focusing on what's happening nationally. So there's been a nationalization of our politics. We used to, based upon Tip O'Neill's famous phrase, all politics is local, right? I mean, that's not really true anymore. All politics is really national now, in that what happens at the local level is driven by national concerns. And that's why you see people in districts focusing in on people like Trump, right? And what Trump does, what Trump says, the movement, the mood, the attitude, all of that seems to be manifesting itself locally. Then your candidate for Congress has to tap into that, right? And that's why you see all of these members of Congress sort of bowing at the feet of Trump, because Trump is sort of controlling all of this. So I think all politics is now national. Members of Congress are responsive to their constituents and only their constituents. But I think their constituents are now concerned with what happens nationally. And I think that's one of the things that's driving that is the internet and social media.
Dr. Bell, we talked in class about what do we do now? And in the book, The Political Brain, that we reviewed in class, we talked about calling out, standing up, and putting some grit. Liberal Democrats should put some grit in their campaigning, that they should stand up and call out Republican trigger antics like gun control and abortion and stuff like that, things that are just, they're buzzwords for a philosophy. But what exactly should Democratic politicians do now if they want to get elected?
Well, I think you alluded to it, that they have to, as we said, call a spade, to come out and say, the code words that are being used. And really, we're seeing it by the Republican Party, less and less code words, and they're coming out and just saying,
they're just saying it.
Exactly what they mean. But still, Democrats need to do a better job with branding and to calling them out for what they are doing. You saw down in Florida, who was it, Senator, was it Rick Scott?
He's one of them.
He's one of them. So he had the Republican plan, right, of what to do with some tax discussion.
That was Rick Scott, yes.
Rick Scott, and I think what Democrats have done is just take parts of that plan and just play them over and over and say, his plan, you're going to pay more taxes. Most people are.
Right.
So just not to, when it comes to these contentious issues like abortion right now, that's something that we're going to discuss a lot in the next coming months, is you can't just see those issues. You can't say, okay, well, Democrats have a favorable rating on that. They need to play into that. And to go back to 2016 again, you had Hillary Clinton, which obviously, as a major female candidate, should, have the authority over Donald Trump and speaking about a woman's right to choose. Was that a major issue in 2016? Did she hit him hard on that? Did a strong majority of women vote for Hillary Clinton? All of these things, Democrats have to do a better job branding and punching back, so to speak. And there are people doing that, okay? That there are those in Congress and different state offices that are Democrats who are doing a much better job of that. And, someone that Republicans like to villainize a lot, AOC,
right.
She does great on Instagram of, hey, give me your questions. And it's kind of, it's really like a town hall, because she'll say, hey, she'll take a question from anyone, and it's she'll answer questions from Republicans and, very liberal Democrats, and she'll sit there and she'll get in front of the kid and she'll just break it down for you.
Right.
So I think just clear language and being a good communicator is still important in politics. And AOC and others, they're also good at hitting back at Republicans and calling them out when they should be called out for things.
Well, Dr. Bowden, how about within the Republican Party? There seem to be some politicians who are pushing back against, like Kemp is not being supported by Trump. Trump is supporting Perdue, but Perdue is not doing very well. So apparently there are Trump supporters who will come all out for Trump, but that doesn't necessarily trickle down to the people that he endorses.
Correct. And so, the interesting thing is how long will Trump be able to control the party the way that he's been controlling the party? And I don't know how long that will last. Perdue's kind of trying to have his feet in both camp here, though, right? I mean, not Perdue. Kemp is trying to have his feet in both places. So
he wants to be like Trump, even though Trump doesn't endorse him.
He
right?
wants Trump supporters, but he's not going to blatantly violate the law and overthrow an election, a legitimate election. Kemp is in a very difficult state because his state is a toss-up, essentially.
Well, Kemp won against Stacey Abrams when he was the Secretary of State. So there's some chatter, let's say, that Kemp is not necessarily squeaky clean when it comes to election protocol.
Well, I mean, he didn't violate any rules there. See, this is the problem. I mean,
Okay.
how in the world did we let an election for the governor happen in one of the largest states in America, where the Secretary of State that was overseeing the election is actually a candidate in the election? How is that even allowed, right? Did he break any laws? No, he didn't break any laws. So it's not, I mean, yeah, if we're not going to fix the system, then the system's going to continue to be rigged and used for the advantage of certain groups over others. So,
All right, so what is an informed electorate? Let's start, so from the beginning, I remember reading things that Thomas Jefferson wrote, that our founding fathers, they wanted the people who vote to have some information to vote from. They didn't want them to vote because somebody's buying them drinks or that sort of thing. And now with the internet, with so much information out there, how do voters get informed? What's the best way to get informed to vote, would you think, Dr. Bell?
I think it would be to come and attend Savannah State University and take political science classes. But there are, Marlon, there's a number of ways, from early childhood education into middle school and high school, of just being informed of teaching that voting does matter. And again, so many people are ignorant of how the system works and the process works, and there are people working to keep people to making it, again, more difficult to vote. So as long as that's there, it's going to be an uphill battle. There are so many simple solutions that we could have that would increase voter turnout, voting on weekends, things like this, a national federal holiday, that, all these things that we've talked about could increase voter turnout. But in terms of being informed, what percentage of the population is politically sophisticated enough to really go down and answer 25 questions about the issues of, all right, you feel, so this candidate, this is their list of policies and issues, and then this is what you feel, okay, go match them up. How many people really do, maybe 5 to 10% of the population is that sophisticated and really think like that? Maybe you do, but again, how do most people vote? They're emotionally drawn to a candidate or a party. Party ID is still the #1 predictor, but after that, what made more people show up for Biden and Hillary? What turned people out for Trump? Is it policies? And no, people were emotionally drawn to that individual. And again, that trickles down to local elections, state elections. So as far as being informed, I think it takes a national commitment through education at all levels. But also we have this technology, especially social media, to put out there and to make people more aware of how they can vote, of what the process is,
right.
To make it easier. But again, these things that aren't done, they're not unintentional. They are intentionally keeping people, from voting through ignorance and other things.
Late night talk show hosts make entertainment out of going on the street in Hollywood, Dr. Bowden, asking people very simple questions like, when was the Civil War, and laughing at the answers they get. What's going on? I mean, why don't, Dr. Bell explained that, maybe we could fix it with better grade school education, primary education, public education, and that perhaps it's that way on purpose, that it suits the needs of the people who are in power to keep the voting public ignorant. What can we do about that? We as voters, we as parents.
Yeah, I mean, I think our system is also designed to make it difficult for voters to know fully and completely what's going on at the various levels, because we have government at so many different levels, right? And it's hard to keep up with that. But I guess my view, and I think this plays out in the data that I see, is most voters know what they want. Most Americans know what they want. They just aren't confident that this is going to manifest itself in a candidate. And if it does manifest itself in a candidate, is it going to manifest itself in a majority that's able to ultimately turn it into public policy? And so there's just a sense in which, there's no way ultimately to make this a democratic society unless we restructure it so that we have a responsive party government.
Well, I am very sorry to say that we're out of time with Dr. Bowden. Dr. Bell, thank you so much for joining me in this discussion. I hope that we will have a chance to discuss some other things in the future. And this has been Marlin Johnson in the room where it's happening.